Hello and welcome. In previous episodes, we've discussed setting up Kubernetes on Windows 10 quickly by leveraging either Docker Desktop Kubernetes feature or installing MicroK's lightweight Kubernetes framework. I have provided links to those presentations in the description below. In this series, starting today, we will continue our Kubernetes journey by setting up Kubernetes cluster from scratch. In this episode specifically, we will install CentOS 8 on a hypervisor, and we will configure its IP address, network settings, and we will enable its remote monitoring capabilities known as Cockpit Web Console. I've made this first episode standalone, so those who are only interested in setting up and learning CentOS benefit without the overhead of Kubernetes installation or learning. The prerequisites are Windows 10. In this presentation, I'll be using Windows 10 and Hyper-V because I have Windows 10 Pro. You can also use VirtualBox on Windows 10 Home Edition if that's the version you have. At least 3 gigs of RAM, free RAM, and 30 gigs of disk space or more. The more, the better. If you are planning to use this as part of Kubernetes cluster, then I recommend assigning the VM's static IP addresses. I also highly recommend setting up NAT or network address translation. I have discussed setting up NAT on Hyper-V in one of my previous presentations. See the link in the course description below. So let's get started and look at our prerequisite to make sure we have at least one hypervisor installed, and then we go from there. For those who have Windows 10 Pro version, to check to see if you have Hyper-V enabled or not, go to Start and type Feature. And then you can click on Turn Windows Features on or off. And look for Hyper-V, and as you can see right here, make sure all these are enabled. So, and that's it. For those who don't have Windows 10 Pro version, instead they have Home, you guys can install VirtualBox. If you go to virtualbox.org and go under the downloads, and here's a Windows host, just click on that and download that. As I mentioned before, if you are planning to set up more than one VMs and you're going to follow along with me in the future installments of setting up a multi-node Kubernetes, and I highly suggest that you set up NAT on your machines. If you are using Windows 10 Pro, I have dedicated a session on setting up NAT on Hyper-V, and I have provided a link in the course description below. Go ahead and check that. If you don't have Windows 10 Pro and you're going to use VirtualBox, and the user manual, click on the user manual, either download it to your box or go to the HTML version, which I have done here, and look for network address translation. So network address translation. So you look for that, and you'll come across this section. If you click on that, it's going to walk you through how to set up NAT on your workstation. There's another option that I'm going to talk about if you don't want to go the NAT way. There's another way that I'll discuss how to do that. So if you don't want to set up NAT, there is another option that some ISP provide, that is Internet Service Providers. You may have access to the router. You may be able to set it up in a way that you can specify the devices that you want to set up as static IP addresses, because by default, all the devices that are connected to the router, they get dynamic IP addresses. But some providers, I have Xfinity, that is Comcast. You can go to the page where you can access the router. In my case, is 10.0.0.1. And then under connected devices, you can click on add device with reserved IP address, and then brings you to this page. Then you can fill out this page. You can, name what the device or what the server name is, the MAC address, and the IP address, reserved IP address that you want to assign. So you have to be in line with the same IP address range that the ISP gives you. And in order to find the MAC address on Linux systems, you can go to a command line. Once you install CentOS, you can go to a command line and type in IP ADDR or IP address, and it gives you information about the IP address and also the virtual adapters that are installed. And usually it's, the first one, Ethernet 0. So there are two of them. One is loopback, and the other one is usually Ethernet 0. So if you only have one virtual adapter, then it should show us Ethernet 0. And then under this link /ether, this is the IP, this is the MAC address. So this is the MAC address that you need to copy and paste it in this box, along with the other information. And then once you say save, then it will automatically, once the device comes online, it will assign it a static IP address, so you don't have to set up NAT. Again, this is not my preferred option, but this is a valid option if you choose to do so. So this is as far as making sure that you have the required infrastructure before even getting into setting up the environment for CentOS. Next, we'll go to Hyper-V and we'll get started setting up CentOS. So in order to get the CentOS installation package, just go to centos.org/download, and then under ISO, click on x86-84. And this is where you get the installation. You can pick any of them and pick the first one and download the installation package. And then once you do that, then we can go ahead and set it up. So next we go to Hyper-V, and this is where we can actually install CentOS. So if you right click on here, click New and Virtual Machine. That's an intro page. And then you can name it whatever you like. I'm going to call the first one Cube-Master. So this is the first server that we're going to set up for a Cube. So Cube stands for Kubernetes-Master, in order for me to distinguish between servers and what their role is. So the master is the server that kind of at the heart of the Kubernetes cluster. So this is the first one that needs to be set up. And then you can put either the VM here or wherever you want. So I want to have control where everything goes. So I set up a folder called VM. I'm going to just select that folder, but you don't have to. You can use the default. Next, and select generation 2. So generation 2 is obviously the latest version of hypervisor technology from Microsoft. Generation 1, if you have older VMs that you need to manage also, then select that one. But by default, if you don't have anything else, just use generation 2. Next, here you assign how much RAM you're going to assign to it. I'm going to assign about 3 gig. I'm going to disable dynamic memory. Be careful with this. If you leave it it starts growing, and then it might actually get to a point where server consuming too much memory. I mean, it doesn't even, there will not even be enough sufficient RAM for the host itself. So if you have a lot of RAM, then you can just let it grow. And here's where you select your networking. So in the previous kind of discussion, we talked about setting up a NAT. So if you already set up a NAT, NAT will show up here, and then select that. Mine is a lab switch. That's what I set up, and that's the one that I set up in one of the presentations before. So you can go and watch that, how to set this up. If you're not using, if you don't want to set anything up like in a cluster environment, you just want a standalone server to play with, you can actually select default switch, and that will provide everything that you need. You don't have to set up any NAT or anything. This will provide a dynamic IP address for the server. So if you have a standalone situation, I would suggest just go with this and don't bother with setting up the NAT. So I'm going to select this one and go next. And now this is where it selects how much disk space we're going to assign to VM. I'm going to assign it like 50 gigs. And then I'm going to put it again and where I put the VM itself. So I'll just put it up here. And then next. And then it will ask you where if you want to install operating system, and I say yes. So I already downloaded the CentOS in the page that I showed you out here. So I downloaded that. So I'm going to point to it. And that is where Hyper-V is going to pick it up and then instruct the start installation. So it's going to start installing stuff. And it's actually done as far as this is minimum, basically, installation. So this is the kube master that we just kind of asked Hyper-V to set up. It's not actually, it hasn't installed anything on it yet. It just provided a shell for the VM. So if you look at the settings, one thing that you want to be careful is when you look at the security, and I would say enable secure boot. But when you do that, make sure that you select this one, Microsoft UEFI Certificate Authority. By default, it picks the first one, and then the installation of OS will fail. So make sure you set that correctly. Just to make sure, again, double check the memory. Is that what you need? I'm fine with 3000 that I set previously. A number of processor, I'm going to bump it up to maybe 3, depending on the capacity of your host. And hard drive, again, that's what I set. So I'm good to go. And network adapter again. So this is kind of review before you commit yourself to setting, start the installation of the OS. So I say OK. And I'm going to start connect. When you say connect, it also starts a VM. So I'm going to start that. And we are going to install OS. Click on that. And starts copying stuff from the installation package to the new VM. It may take a little while. I'm going to pause and then continue. Now I got to the page where we select our language, depending where you are. Obviously, I'm in the United States, so English, United States, and then continue. And this is a page we have to make some selection, for instance, settings, date and time, depending on where you are. And then you select, I'm in Midwest, so I'll probably select Chicago. And OK, done. And then under software installation, oops, sorry, the wrong one. You have some, if you like, you can add some software to install as part of the setup. It depends on your needs. You can also install them later on from command line using the package manager. So I'm going to leave that and install some stuff later on. The next one is the installation destination. I'm fine with the current selection. I'm not going to add any more disk space, so I say OK. I'm not going to make any changes here. And on here, kdump, I'm going to disable that because that will consume a lot of disk space. We are not in production, so I don't really want to do any crash dumping, so I disable that. Now this is an important part, the network part. So this is where you actually call your server and set up your network. So I'm going to call it again, kube master. And also now configure the network. In here, I just go to, there's a lot of other options. We don't really care about those unless you have a proxy that you're behind proxy. Otherwise, just click on IP port setting. And in this case, you want to, it automatically, so if you had selected the default switch, then you leave it as automatic. But in my case, because I set up NAT, I want to set that manually. So I'm going to set that to manual. And I'm going to add now the IP address. So in my case, with the 192.168.0.20. So again, you have to kind of be careful what network IP address you set. It has to be in line with your NAT, the range of IPs that you specified in there. And same thing with the mask. So 255 in my case, .255.255.0. And gateway, that would be the IP address of the host, .0.1 in my case. Oops. And the DNS server, for now, I'm just going to add Google 8.8.8.8. And I guess that's it. So let's just double check that. That is my IP, 192.168.0.20, the mask, and the gateway, 192.168.0.1. And I'm going to save that. And I'm going to turn it up. So you can see by default it is off. So let's go ahead and turn it on. And now we can see that it took the new IP address. Okay, so we are done here. And it will begin installation process. One thing, we need to set up the root password. So root is the administrator password. You can set it to whatever you want. You can also set another user. I recommend that setting up another user. So just put my own name and set another, again, password. You can also make, suggest make that user, which is yourself, who's going to yourself, make that administrator also. So we click done. and it will begin the installation process. So again, it will take a few minutes. I'm going to pause and then we continue. So the installation is completed, and then we can now reboot and start the server. So the reboot is completed. Now we are at what is called initial setup. One thing to make sure that we need to click on the license information and accept. I know everybody's going to read all this, but anyway, we have to do that. Otherwise, we can't go any further. Okay, and then finish configuration. And finally, we are at the login page. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. Again, some confirmation page, the language you selected and all the other stuff. I'm going to just bypass those, skip, and that's it. So we have now a successful configuration of CentOS. And then obviously we need to look at activities. So that's kind of a graphical view of CentOS, but you probably won't spend any time here. You probably should want to go to the terminal and start, doing stuff from terminal. So this is as far as installation of CentOS is concerned. Next, we will install some updates and we go from there. Note that we can run anything we want from here, from the terminal, as shown here. But it's a little bit inconvenient because if you want to copy and paste between your desktop and server, is a little bit difficult. So the better option that I would suggest is you install the OpenSSH.Client on your desktop. So OpenSSH is a secure connection from one box to another. So here we want to connect from our desktop to the server. So we need to install a utility called OpenSSH.Client. So let me just make that a little bit bigger. So here's a command: Add-WindowsCapability -online-name OpenSSH.Client star. So what it does is it will install an OpenSSH.Client on your machine, and we will be able to now SSH or secure connect to the server. So that's the command. I'm going to wait here, you guys. If you're following, go ahead and install that, and then we continue. So hopefully you install OpenSSH. Now, in order to connect to the server, you say SSH, and the account that you want to connect to your machine. You probably created an account. So for me, it was Gary, and then the server IP address. So mine is 192.168.0.20 in my case. Obviously, your case might be different. So type in the correct IP address to the server, hit enter, and you will see, you get a warning. It wants to ensure that that server is trusted, basically. So are you sure you want to continue? And you have to actually type yes. Just why is not going to do it. You have to say yes. So yes, I'm going to, and then now I'm prompted with the password to the server. You put in the password, and now you're actually in that server. And you can test that by issuing host name. And this is KubeMaster. This is for the server that I called. So we definitely are in the server. So let me clear the screen. One thing that you may want to consider installing is the client, some client software on the server. If you're doing development, it will install things such as GCC, Git, Flex, and a bunch of others. So I'm going to install those. So let's go through the command here. Sudo means, basic means I'm going to, let me make that a little bit bigger. So sudo means that you're running as elevator or as privilege as admin. DNF is the software package management on CentOS. It used to be called YAM. The older version is called YUM. That still works. And then group install, because this the open tools are part of a kind of group install, a bunch of them together. So you specify a group install, and in this case, we want to install development tools. And the -y means sometimes it asks you, do you want to install this or you want to install that? You specify -y at the beginning, you say, yes, I want to install. Don't ask me if I want to install this or not. So, and hit enter. And then you ask for a password again. Now it's going to install a bunch of stuff. Again, I'm going to pause here and then continue once it's done. Okay, the installation now completed. Let me clear the screen again. The next thing that we need to do is very important, is to actually update the kernel itself. So the command is sudo dnf update /-y. So that will actually update all the software that already installed to the latest one. And this is important, especially when you have a fresh install of the OS and may not have all the latest security and other features. So just I would recommend that you go ahead and update everything. So run that. And again, it takes a little bit of while. We'll continue afterwards. So the update is complete now. We have now an OS with the latest versions of everything, not only the kernel itself, but also all the software that comes with it. So we have the latest version of everything. Great, now we're ready to go to next step. Let me clear the screen, and Control L in Linux, that will clear the screen. And the next thing I want to install is Cockpit. This is a very nice way of monitoring CentOS. So it's a feature that comes with CentOS, but is not enabled by default. So we need to install that. So the command is sudo systemctl enable --now cockpit.socket. So let's run that. Again, ask for my password. And that is now enabled. Now we need to open a firewall port for the service we just installed. And the command is sudo the firewall -cmd -add port, and port number is 9090 and is TCP. So basically we're saying open this port in the firewall for this service. Let's run that. Also need to run another command, and this one is basically saying same thing, sudo firewall cmd --zone public --add port 9090 and make that permanent. So which means that every time that reboot, you don't have to set that command again. So run that, and that's it. So now we have a service that basically a URL that we can go to now and look at the health of our server. So if we go to the browser now and open a new tab here, let me make that bigger. So the URL is the IP address of your server, port 9090 that we just opened, and system. So that's all you need to do when you run it. It shows you a warning that the connection is not private. Say, okay, that's okay because we trust the site, and then proceed to this. And then you can put in, you have to put in, again, log into that page. And you can see there's a lot of information here. Health, how many services failed. For instance, you got 2% for some reason they failed. The CPU usage, the memory usage, the logs. So this is very, very, very helpful for managing the server. And you can do a lot of things from here. You can look at the network settings, for instance. All the information. You can also actually change if you need to make some changes here. Accounts, you can add new user if you like to. So storage, if you're adding, for instance, new storage, you can manage that from here. There's a lot of things that you can do from here. One thing also, software updates. We can come here and update the software if you don't want to run it from the command line. So this is very, very helpful for managing the server. So this is as far as setting up a new fresh CentOS. So again, I'm not going to go through any of the Kubernetes for this. I just wanted to make this standalone for those who may not even be interested in setting up Kubernetes at this point, just setting up a server. Thank you again for joining. I hope you find it useful. Also, please make sure to check out my other courses. I will provide links to those in the description of the course. Thank you again and take care.